My daughter-in-law starts to get too cozy with me when my son isn't around. But soon things get ugly, and I have to take a decision. I am a 62-year-old widower. My wife passed away 5 years ago, shortly before our son John, 32, got married to Brittany, 30. After their wedding, John and Brittany moved in with me, saying it was temporary until they found their own place. That was 4 years ago. I'm well off financially due to smart investments and a successful business I sold before retiring. Since John and Brittany moved in, they've been living entirely off my wealth. I pay for everything: groceries, utilities, their car payments, and even their personal expenses like clothes and entertainment. At first, I didn't mind. I thought they needed time to settle into married life and find their footing. But as months turned into years, I started to feel taken advantage of. There were several incidents that bothered me. Last year, John asked for $10,000 to invest in cryptocurrency. I trusted him and gave him the money, only to later discover he had used it for a lavish vacation with Brittany. They went to Bali for 2 weeks, staying in a 5-star resort and posting endless photos on social media. It hurt to realize they had lied to me. Brittany's shopping habits also became a point of concern. She often goes on shopping sprees, buying designer clothes and accessories. Just last month, she came home with 3 new Louis Vuitton bags and a pair of Christian Louboutin shoes. When I casually asked about the cost, she brushed it off, saying it was a treat for herself. She never offers to contribute to household expenses. They've also developed a habit of throwing parties at my house, inviting their friends over, and using my wine cellar without asking. Last New Year's Eve, they hosted a party for about 50 people. They didn't even bother to inform me beforehand. I came home from a quiet dinner with a friend to find my house packed with strangers and my prized wine collection significantly depleted. John quit his job 2 years ago to pursue his passion for painting. He converted our garage into a studio and spends hours there every day. However, he hasn't sold a single piece yet. When I gently suggested he might consider part-time work to support his art, he got defensive and accused me of not believing in his talent. Recently, they asked me to co-sign a loan for a new sports car. When I refused, explaining that it wasn't a wise financial decision, they got upset. Brittany didn't speak to me for days, and John kept making passive-aggressive comments about how I don't support their dreams. Despite these issues, I never said anything. I didn't want to create conflict or risk damaging my relationship with my only child. But last month, I decided enough was enough. I called John into my study and told him I couldn't support them financially anymore. I explained that at 32, he needed to take responsibility for his own life and find a job. I said I'd give them 3 months to get their finances in order before I stopped covering their expenses. John was shocked but seemed to understand. He apologized for relying on me for so long and promised to start looking for work immediately. I felt relieved after our talk, thinking the issue was resolved. However, things took an unexpected turn after that conversation. Brittany's behavior towards me changed dramatically. She became overly attentive and started spending a lot of time around me. She began making me breakfast every morning, something she'd never done before. At first, I thought it was a nice gesture, but it quickly became uncomfortable. She'd linger in the kitchen, asking personal questions about my day and my plans. One evening, after I mentioned having a stiff neck, she offered to give me a massage. I politely declined, but she insisted, saying her father had taught her great techniques. The way she looked at me made me feel uneasy. During our family movie nights, Brittany started sitting next to me on the couch instead of with John. She would often lean against me, claiming she was cold or tired. It made me incredibly uncomfortable, especially when John was right there in the room. Her compliments became frequent and somewhat inappropriate. She'd tell me I looked handsome, or that I must have been quite the catch when I was younger. Once, she even said I was in great shape for my age and asked about my workout routine, her eyes lingering a bit too long. Perhaps most disturbingly, Brittany began walking around the house in more revealing clothing than usual. She'd come downstairs for breakfast in short nightgowns or tight yoga pants, things she never used to wear around me. Meanwhile, John was out most days, allegedly job hunting. This left me alone with Brittany for long stretches, which made me increasingly uncomfortable. I'm not used to this kind of attention, especially from my daughter-in-law. It feels inappropriate and makes me uneasy. Last week, I was in the kitchen making coffee when Brittany came in wearing just a towel. She claimed she forgot her robe in the laundry room and asked if I could get it for her. The way she held the towel, barely covering herself, seemed deliberate. I awkwardly declined and quickly left the kitchen, my heart racing. A few days ago, she asked me to help her unclog the shower drain. When I went to the bathroom, she was in there wearing a very skimpy bathrobe. She stood unnecessarily close to me as I worked on the drain, her perfume overwhelming in the small space. Yesterday, during dinner, she spilled wine on her shirt. Instead of going to change, she took off her shirt right there at the table, leaving her in just a bra. She asked if I had any stain removal tips, but her eyes seemed to be challenging me, watching for my reaction. I mumbled something about club soda and excused myself from the table. This morning, she came into my room without knocking while I was getting dressed. I was standing there in just my underwear, and she didn't immediately leave. She apologized but lingered, her eyes roaming over me in a way that made my skin crawl. I'm starting to feel like something is wrong. Brittany's behavior seems calculated, and I'm worried she might have ulterior motives. I've started being more careful around her. I make sure to lock my bedroom door at night and avoid being alone with her in closed spaces like the kitchen or living room. I've started taking my meals in my study instead of the dining room to minimize our interactions. I've also started making excuses to leave the house when John is out, so I'm not alone with Brittany. I've taken up golf again, joined a book club, and started volunteering at the local animal shelter, anything to keep me out of the house during the day. As a precaution, I've hidden my financial documents and changed the passwords on my accounts. I hate that I feel the need to do this, but Brittany's sudden interest in my daily routine and finances has made me paranoid. I haven't mentioned any of this to John. I'm not sure if I'm overreacting or if Brittany is genuinely trying to manipulate me somehow. Part of me wonders if this is some misguided attempt to ensure I keep supporting them financially. I'm at a loss for what to do. I don't want to accuse Brittany of anything without proof, but I also don't want to continue feeling uncomfortable in my own home. I'm considering asking them to move out sooner than the 3-month deadline I initially gave them. Should I talk to John about Brittany's behavior? Or am I just an old man misinterpreting a young woman's friendliness? I need some outside perspective on this. Thanks for reading. Update. Hello everyone. I wanted to provide an update on my situation. Things came to a head last night, and I felt I needed to share what happened. As I mentioned in my previous post, Brittany's behavior had been making me increasingly uncomfortable. Last night, things escalated to a point where I couldn't ignore it anymore. John was out late, attending a job fair in the city. Brittany suggested we watch a movie together while we waited for him to return. I hesitated at first, not wanting to be alone with her, but I also didn't want to seem rude or paranoid. So, I agreed. We settled in the living room to watch an old classic film. At first, everything seemed normal. Brittany sat on the opposite end of the couch, and I felt relieved. Maybe I had been overreacting after all, I thought. About halfway through the movie, Brittany got up to get a blanket. When she returned, instead of going back to her original spot, she sat right next to me. I tensed up but tried to focus on the movie. As time passed, Brittany inched closer to me. I could feel the warmth of her body next to mine, and it made me extremely uncomfortable. I shifted away slightly, hoping she'd get the hint, but she didn't. Then, during a particularly emotional scene in the movie, Brittany suddenly leaned her head on my shoulder. I froze, not knowing how to react. My heart started racing, and I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. Before I could say anything, Brittany took my hand in hers. She intertwined our fingers and gave my hand a gentle squeeze. That was the final straw for me. I abruptly stood up, almost causing Brittany to fall over on the couch. I mumbled something about needing to use the bathroom and quickly left the room. Once in the bathroom, I splashed cold water on my face and tried to calm down. I stared at my reflection in the mirror, seeing a confused and troubled old man looking back at me. I knew I couldn't go on like this. The situation had gone too far, and I needed to address it head on. After a few minutes of gathering my thoughts and courage, I decided to confront Brittany about her behavior. I walked back to the living room, where Brittany was still sitting on the couch. She looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Was it concern or something else? I took a deep breath and asked Brittany if we could talk. She nodded, patting the spot next to her on the couch. I shook my head and remained standing, needing to maintain some physical distance between us. I started by telling Brittany that I had noticed a change in her behavior towards me recently. I mentioned that while I appreciated her attempts to be kind, some of her actions had made me feel uncomfortable. Brittany's face changed as I spoke. The smile she had been wearing faded, replaced by a frown. She opened her mouth to speak, but I held up my hand, asking her to let me finish. I explained that, as her father-in-law, I cared for her, but only in a familial way. I told her that some of her recent actions, the revealing clothing, the unnecessary physical contact and tonight's hand-holding were inappropriate given our relationship. I made it clear that I wasn't accusing her of anything specific, but I needed her to understand that this behavior had to stop. I asked her to maintain appropriate boundaries and treat me as she would any other older family member. As I spoke, I saw various emotions flicker across Brittany's face: surprise, confusion, and then what looked like anger. When I finished, the room fell into an uncomfortable silence. After what felt like an eternity, Brittany finally spoke. Her voice was cold and hard, nothing like the overly sweet tone she had been using with me lately. She said she was deeply offended by my implications. She claimed she had only been trying to be nice to me, and that I had completely misinterpreted her actions. Brittany stood up, her face flushed with anger. She said she couldn't believe I would think such horrible things about her. She accused me of having a dirty mind and twisting her innocent gestures into something perverted. Before I could respond or clarify anything, Brittany stormed out of the living room. I heard her running up the stairs and slamming the bedroom door shut. I stood there in shock, trying to process what had just happened. Part of me felt guilty for upsetting her, wondering if I had indeed misread the situation. But another part of me felt relieved to have finally addressed the issue, regardless of her reaction. I went to my study and sat there, replaying the conversation in my mind. About an hour later, I heard John come home. There was some muffled conversation upstairs, and then silence. This morning, neither John nor Brittany came down for breakfast. When I went to the kitchen to make coffee, I found a note from John saying they had gone to stay with Brittany's parents for a few days. The note didn't mention anything about what had happened last night, which made me wonder what Brittany had told him. I'm now sitting in my quiet, empty house, feeling a mix of relief and anxiety. I'm glad I spoke up and set boundaries, but I'm worried about the repercussions this might have on my relationship with John. I'm not sure what will happen when they return. Will Brittany admit to her behavior? Will John believe me if I tell him what's been going on? Or have I just created a rift in our family that can't be repaired? I know I did the right thing by addressing the issue, but I can't help feeling like I've opened a can of worms. I'm preparing myself for a difficult conversation with John when they return. Thank you all for your support and advice on my original post. It gave me the courage to confront this uncomfortable situation. I'll update again once I've had a chance to talk with John and figure out where we go from here. Update. After my last update, I felt lost and confused about the whole situation with Brittany and John. I decided to confide in my old friend, Mike. We've known each other for over 40 years, and he's always been a voice of reason in my life. I invited Mike over for coffee and told him everything that had happened. I explained Brittany's strange behavior, my confrontation with her, and their sudden departure to her parents' house. As I spoke, I noticed Mike's expression growing more and more concerned. When I finished my story, Mike was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that shook me to my core. He suggested that I might be looking at the situation from the wrong perspective. Mike reminded me that John had never been the most responsible or honest person, even as a child. He gently pointed out that John's behavior as an adult, living off my wealth, lying about the cryptocurrency investment, quitting his job to pursue a non-existent art career, all pointed to a pattern of manipulation and entitlement. Mike then presented a theory that made my blood run cold. He said it was possible that John might be planning to trap me in some kind of scandal with Brittany. The goal could be to extort money from me or secure a larger part of my inheritance. Mike hastened to add that he hoped this wasn't the case, but given John's history, we couldn't rule it out. I felt sick to my stomach at the thought. I didn't want to believe my own son could be capable of such deceit. But as I reflected on recent events, I had to admit that Mike's theory made a disturbing amount of sense. Mike offered to do some discreet investigating. He had some contacts in town who might be able to shed light on John's activities. I hesitated at first, feeling like I was betraying my son's trust. But then I remembered all the times John had betrayed my trust, and I agreed to let Mike look into it. A few days later, Mike came back with some troubling information. He discovered that John had never been going job hunting as he claimed. Instead, he had been spending his days at a friend's house, playing video games and drinking. This friend, it turned out, had a bit of a reputation as a small-time con artist. This revelation hit me hard. I had been proud of John for seemingly taking responsibility and looking for work. To find out it was all a lie felt like a punch to the gut. I realized that something was indeed very fishy about this whole situation. I asked Mike to dig deeper. I needed to know the full extent of what was going on. Mike was hesitant, warning me that I might not like what he found, but I insisted. I had to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. A week passed, and I heard nothing from John or Brittany. I was a nervous wreck, jumping every time the phone rang or there was a knock at the door. Finally, Mike called and asked to meet me in person. From the tone of his voice, I knew he had found something significant. We met at a quiet coffee shop out of town, away from prying eyes and ears. Mike looked grim as he sat down across from me. He took a deep breath and told me what he had discovered. Through his contacts, Mike had uncovered a shocking plan. John and Brittany had been plotting to accuse me of making inappropriate advances towards Brittany. They intended to use this false accusation to force me into giving them a substantial part of my wealth and inheritance. They had even gone so far as to consult a lawyer about how to proceed with their plan. I felt like the ground had disappeared from beneath my feet. My own son, my flesh and blood, had been planning to destroy my reputation and extort me. And Brittany, who I had welcomed into my home and treated like a daughter, was complicit in this cruel scheme. As the shock wore off, it was replaced by a burning anger. I had spent years making excuses for John's behavior, always giving him the benefit of the doubt. But this was beyond forgiveness. This was a betrayal of the deepest kind. I thanked Mike for his help and went home to plan my next move. I spent the night poring over financial documents, changing passwords, and making calls to my lawyer and financial advisor. By morning, I had secured my assets and was ready to confront John and Brittany. I called John and told him I needed to speak with both of them urgently. He sounded nervous, but agreed to come home with Brittany that afternoon. While I waited, Mike arrived with all the evidence he had gathered, including recordings and witnesses' statements. When John and Brittany arrived, I was sitting in my study, Mike by my side. I asked them to sit down, and before they could say anything, I started speaking. I told them I knew everything about their plan. I laid out all the details: the false job hunting, the consultations with the lawyer, the planned accusation. John's face went pale, while Brittany looked like she might be sick. John tried to interrupt, to deny everything, but I held up my hand to stop him. I told him I had proof of everything I was saying. Then, just as Mike had predicted, John tried to turn the tables. He stood up and pointed at me, his voice shaking with fake outrage. He accused me of making lewd advances towards Brittany, saying that was the real reason they had left. I let him finish his performance. Then I nodded to Mike, who started playing the recordings he had gathered. We heard John's voice, discussing the plan with his friend, laughing about how they were going to take me for all I was worth. We heard Brittany's voice too, suggesting ways to make the false accusation more believable. As the recordings played, John and Brittany's faces crumpled. They realized they had been caught red-handed. There was no way to deny or explain away what we had all just heard. When the recordings finished, I spoke again. My voice was calm but cold. I told them I was deeply disappointed and hurt by their actions. I said I had always tried to be a good father and had welcomed Brittany into our family with open arms. Their betrayal was unforgivable. I then informed them that I wanted them out of my house immediately. I had already packed their belongings, which were waiting in the garage. I told them I had changed all the locks and security codes. I made it clear that they were no longer welcome in my home or my life. John tried to argue, to make excuses, but I shut him down. I told him that if he ever tried to contact me again or made any attempts to spread false accusations, I would not hesitate to make all of this evidence public. The thought of his reputation being destroyed seemed to finally silence him. Brittany started crying, begging for forgiveness, saying it was all John's idea. I didn't respond to her pleas. I simply stood up, walked to the door, and held it open, waiting for them to leave. With slumped shoulders and averted eyes, John and Brittany walked out of my study, out of my house, and out of my life. As I watched them drive away, I felt a mix of relief, sadness, and anger. Mike put a comforting hand on my shoulder. He reminded me that I had done the right thing, that I couldn't let them take advantage of me any longer. I nodded, knowing he was right, but still feeling the ache of loss in my heart. Over the next few weeks, I took steps to protect myself legally and financially. I updated my will, removing John entirely. I informed our extended family about what had happened, wanting to get ahead of any stories John and Brittany might try to spread. It's been a month now since that confrontation. I haven't heard from John or Brittany, and I'm not sure I ever will again. Some days, the silence in the house is deafening. Other days, it's a blessed relief. I'm still processing everything that happened. I'm angry at John and Brittany for their betrayal, but I'm also angry at myself for being so blind to their true nature for so long. I'm working with a therapist to deal with these feelings and to learn how to move forward. I'm grateful for Mike's friendship and support through all of this. Without him, I might never have uncovered the truth. He's been checking in on me regularly, making sure I'm not isolating myself too much. As for the future, I'm not sure what it holds. I'm considering selling the house and moving to a smaller place, maybe in a different town. I think a fresh start might do me good. I'm also looking into volunteering opportunities. I have a lot of love to give, and if I can't give it to my own family, maybe I can make a difference in someone else's life. To everyone who read my original post and first update, thank you for your support and advice. Life has taken an unexpected and painful turn, but I'm determined to move forward. If there's one lesson I've learned from all this, it's the importance of trusting your instincts and not letting family ties blind you to the truth. Thank you for letting me share my story. I hope it might help someone else who finds themselves in a similar situation. Trust your gut, seek help when you need it, and don't be afraid to stand up for yourself, even against family.